down.
I remember this shitty song.
Boy, I
do. Yeah, we watched Sold Out, everybody. Swear to God, Sold Out was playing on WWE 24/7 and we watched it. I never saw that pay-per-view the first time it aired.
Neither did I, actually.
I don't even know why.
This is the first time for either of us. You had a job at that point covering this stuff.
I have no idea why I didn't see this.
By this point in my life, I was seeing some pay-per-views, but not all of them, and not this one.
Glad I didn't see it.
Wish I had not seen it tonight.
You know, I used to argue with Dave about whether TNA was worse than WCW. Mm-hmm. And he always said, oh my God, WCW was much worse. And I was always like, bullshit. TNA is horrendous. Well, and granted, this was the dirt, absolute death worst of WCW. This NWO pay-per-view Sold Out. But this was so much more horrible than Impact. This was so much more horrible than Genesis. I would watch Genesis every day for the rest of my life before I'd watch an NWA pay-per-view once a week.
Hell yeah. Yes, Dave wins that argument tonight. This
show was horrible in every conceivable way.
I'm trying to think.
How many times have we said that about Impact?
Oh, many. I to this day will say that Impact is a worse television show than Thunder. But I don't think there's ever been an Impact as bad as this show.
Well, when they start putting those Thunders on 24/7, we're going to have to go back, and maybe we are wrong about that as well.
I cannot wait.
All right, Sold Out. This was a horrendous show.
Let's talk about my balls more instead.
I think we actually should have talked about this before Raw and SmackDown, because I would have given them glowing reviews. Let's review this and then review the barbed wire Christmas tree Impact.
This show, as we noted, I have no idea who it was marketed to. I don't know who they thought would like this. It opened...
The answer is no one. No one could have possibly liked this.
Then why did they do it?
If you're a WCW fan and they didn't like the NWO, you would have hated this. And you're an NWO fan...
You also would have hated this.
You would have hated this. These guys look like such jackasses, and it was an awful show. They look like such geeks. And... who was supposed to buy this?
And if you didn't care about either side of the feud and you merely wanted to see good wrestling, you were also fucked.
This is just a horrendous show.
The show opened with footage of the NWO getting a police escort to the building. Mm-hmm. This was shot in grainy black and white. The NWO, for some reason, was all hanging off the back of garbage trucks. Not shitting you. They were throwing up their gang sign. They were hooting and hollering. Finally got to the building, and they all started mugging for the camera, like 24 of them, just shouting like complete fools. Just went on forever. It cut to inside the arena. Show was out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Yeah, NWO country, everybody.
A podunk hicktown. There was a ghetto pyro display. Bischoff appeared at a podium on top of the stage. He introduced Hogan, Hall, and Nash, and then they had 3 big video screens. And Hogan, Hall, and Nash each appeared on one. All 3 of them were talking at the same time.
Hold on. These were not video screens. These were like the screens you see at a movie theater. The big white canvas where you take a projector and you shoot an image onto the screens. So you can't see a goddamn thing.
Yes.
And the only way you know who's talking is because of their voices.
Which, again, they were all talking at the same time.
Then... Bischoff introduces the $1 Million Man, the $1 trillion man, $1 trillion Ted, who's going to be his broadcast partner, and Ted can't figure out where he's at or how to put on the fucking headsets. This was like train wreck.
They appear to have not rehearsed this at all.
No, I mean when we use the term train wreck, we often use it loosely. I am not throwing that term around loosely here. This was a fucking train wreck to open up this show.
Opener was Chris Jericho versus Masahiro Chono. The gimmick was that it was the NWO's pay-per-view, so the WCW guys got no music. They just came out with the NWO announcer calling them losers and making fun of their names and hometowns and stuff. So they look like geeks, which makes you wonder why you're paying to watch them. Then the NWO guys all came out, and as we quickly learned, or not so quickly in my case, they all had the exact same song.
Yeah.
It was a song that opened this show, and it sucked.
They had a live band playing it.
Had a live band.
By the way, Vinny, for Christ's sake, I don't know how long you've been editing, but if you write a word in Word and it continually autocorrects it, every time it autocorrects it, a little box appears under the word, and if you click that box immediately, you can hit disable autocorrect, and it'll never correct that word again.
Check that. N-W-O space now. I see no box.
Did it fix it?
It fixed it to now.
Now move the cursor over it.
There's a little blue box there.
Click it.
It's very small. Autocorrect options. Oh, holy shit.
It'll never correct that fucking word again.
Stop automatically correcting NWO. Well, there you go.
That did that thing to me actually for years during the 90s.
I
wanted to kill
this.
somebody.
Yes.
God, I hated that. But anyway, now you know how.
All right, good.
So,
what the hell were we?
Chono coming out with his homely women.
There were women all over the show. They must have been the women they found in the parking lot right before they went on the air.
This was what was most perplexing about this.
I don't understand it.
The NWA was supposed to be cool. That's at least the idea that I got. And maybe they were supposed to be uncool heels, but that still begs the question, who was buying this fucking show then? So we're just going to presume that they were supposed to be cool heels. They had all these women there because they were going to have a Miss NWO contest. Now, if I were in charge and the idea was, okay, Brian, you're supposed to be a cool heel, and I was going to have a Miss NWO contest, I'd find the hottest girls I could. Not these guys. Mullets, missing teeth, old. And when I say old, I'm not just talking like middle-aged.
60s.
These were not MILFs.
No.
These were... What would the term be?
Gibboleth. A grandma I wouldn't like to fuck.
I don't even know what to make of this. I really don't know what to make of this. It was just... I don't know.
They also...
What was the point of all of these ugly women all over this fucking show?
They also were all bad interviews, as we find out throughout the show.
And let me say something about Eric Bischoff. This guy, he's nuts. He's out of his mind. He's... I could say a lot of words, but Eric Bischoff on this show was... It was just amazing to watch this in hindsight. He was so fucking cocky. He's talking about how it's great to be king. We're on top of the world. We're spending Ted Turner's money. Wasting, he may have said, on this pay-per-view.
I don't know.
Guys leave here. They got to go somewhere else. You know where that is. It was just like 4 years later, dude.
Dead.
4 years later, you're out. You're done.
Less than that.
Well, this was what, 97?
So
98, 99, 2000, 2001. 4 years.
Okay, you're right.
4 years later, done. And just amazing to look back at this. He was like so fucking ridiculously cocky. Like cocky, the fall is going to happen anytime. And it did.
And in fact, it did, yes. Also, because he was just saying whatever we asked who was supposed to enjoy this show. The person who was most supposed to enjoy Eric Bischoff's commentary was Eric Bischoff himself. We all remember how every wrestler would just throw a kick to the gut, and he would call it a back leg front kick.
Oh, God.
Chris Jericho in this match here with Masahiro Chono threw an enziguri. And Bischoff couldn't just call the move, or couldn't even call it with whatever his karate terminology was. He went into a tirade saying basically that whatever they called it in wrestling was wrong. That move was, and this is a quote, a jump back leg round kick.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Maybe when they practiced this move in Bischoff's Karate Dojo, that's what it was called. But if you're the head of a wrestling company, shouldn't you know the name of what they call it in wrestling?
No.
Am I out of line for suggesting this?
No, because Eric Bischoff was the king. He could rename all these fucking moves.
Yeah. So they also had a unique camera lens. They took one camera and put a fisheye lens on it, so the center was all blown up and the edges were all distorted. And that wasn't wacky enough. They had to take this thing and put it at the end of a long pole, like 12 feet long, and there was a guy walking around on the floor holding it, waving it back and forth over the ring. It
Wretched.
had no Steadicam to it.
Wretched.
They kept going back into it it actually got worse later, but they went to it over and over again. It was quite terrible. So Chono eventually won this mess with a Yakuza
Why was there
kick.
a fisheye lens?
There was never a good reason given.
It added nothing and subtracted a lot.
It's made it... Well, I'll talk about it now. There was a point in the Marcus Bagwell, or the Buff Bagwell match later, where they did a somewhat long high spot full of all sorts of guys running off the ropes and leapfrogs and whatnot. And they shot the entire thing with a fisheye lens and it was waving back and forth, and wrestlers were getting back and forth, and I actually my stomach got upset. It was a camera angle designed to make the fans sick. So yes, Chono won. They cut to Bischoff and DiBiase, who were calling the show. They were sitting on boxes next to the stage. They were in the dark. Don't ask me. I don't know what sort of counterculture thing they were going for, but it seems to me a pretty basic rule of television that if you're going to put someone on camera to be seen, they should be illuminated.
Yeah, well, black and white. But there was a lot of black on the show.
This wasn't even black and white, though. That would at least be arty. This was just guys sitting in shadows talking. They showed a bunch of photos of women who wanted to be Miss NWO. Again, they picked out the worst photos they could. They were women, like, chopping wood and just bad. I didn't get it. And Bischoff was, yes, he was the cockiest man ever here, but at least Bischoff, when he's playing a smarmy, sleazy guy, is very good at playing that role. DiBiase was trying to play a sidekick and was completely uncomfortable. Very awkward television with no chemistry. So then we had some guy. If they named him, I don't know. I missed it. He was no one I'd ever seen before. He was wearing sunglasses and an NWO shirt, and he was interviewing the Miss NWO candidates. So the first question...
Jeff Katz.
Oh! Well... I apologize.
This was one of the very rare times.
Who the fuck is Jeff Katz?
One of the very rare times he actually appeared on screen. But he was with WCW for a while. I think he even had he was on the WCW hotline, in fact. He actually reminded me a lot. He was not bad.
Well, no, I guess not.
He carried some shitty segments.
I will say it is true.
Can you imagine if, for example...
Todd Grisham
were handling these segments?
Todd Grisham would have been better.
Oh, I don't know.
I remember when he buried the guy who asked about Impact.
Well, that's true.
Todd has his moments.
Yeah.
When if you just sent him out there and said, if these people act stupidly, bury them, he'd be good at that.
Jeff Katz was totally fine here, and he reminded me of Sinbad on our board. I was not impressed by how bad he was or anything. I was impressed that they put this man out there with no introduction and expected us to know what was going on. Well, no, they identified him by name.
I just missed it then. Then I'm just an idiot.
Well, yeah.
So the first question was, what does NWO for life mean to you? The woman paused, and she appeared to be considering this question, and then she mumbled. I think she said elation. Or other options that she said fellatio. Either answer, I guess, is acceptable. They just moved on. So the question for the second woman was, what would she do to tame big sexy Kevin Nash? And she also took a long time to reply, then said, anything it takes. So he said, give me some details. And she refused to speak.
Yes. Yeah.
A great promo when you don't talk. So that sucked. We had Hugh Morris versus Big Bubba in a Mexican death match.
That's what they called it, a Mexican death match.
There were no Mexicans involved.
No.
And nobody died, so I don't know
when they
mentioned
this. Mexican death match and then Hugh Morris and Big Bubba came out, I thought, oh, the Mexican death match must be coming up next.
No,
this was
it.
In fact, at one point, Ted DiBiase Sr. actually said, why is this a Mexican death match? To which there was no response.
No one knows. So it was a last man standing match, as we eventually found out. Hugh Morris was out there in a tie-dye t-shirt and jeans, looking like a long-lost Dudley boy. They, this sucked. They brawled a lot.
They had a horrible match.
They had a god-awful match.
Bubba's selling was hideously hilarious.
Yes, Jimmy Hart was there. They called him the human cartoon, which is true. And then DiBiase asked, and this is a quote, I wonder what he's on.
That's what he said. I wonder what he's on. He's always moving around so fast.
Yeah. So, okay, here's... If it was just a shitty brawl and a long, boring last man standing match, I may have forgiven it. But no, It was a shitty, long, boring last man standing match with a heel referee. So here's what happened. Okay, a chain was involved. Hugh Morris hit Bubba with the chain, went up top, hit his moonsault. A 300-pound man flying through the air and squashing Bubba, rendering him incapacitated. So the heel ref stands over him and begins to count. Only he's a heel ref, and so he refuses to count to 10. So let's think about this. He's allegedly friends with the man on the mat unconscious. And rather, he is so friendly that what he wants to do is, rather than let him lose this Mexican death match, he instead is going to not let the fight be over and send him back into action to take more punishment.
Well, yeah, because they can't lose. That's the whole key. That was not my biggest problem with this fucking show. My biggest problem with this show and the referee was, I think Nick Patrick every now and then forgot what he was supposed to be doing.
That is entirely possible.
So, like, a heel would be getting covered, and he'd forget that he was supposed to do a slow count. Or the babyface would be covered, and he'd forget to do the fast count.
Well, that happened here.
And then Bischoff was also confused, because at one point, Patrick apparently got fused and did a weird count, and then Bischoff's like, that appeared to be a slow count by Nick Patrick. And I think he was talking about a slow count that Nick Patrick had delivered when the babyface was... Wait, the heel was down. So he would want a slow count, but he got confused. Anyway, it was just... Nobody knew what was going on this show.
It was shit.
It was horrible.
It happened here because Bubba knocked Morris down, and Nick Patrick gave him a 10 count to win the match, and rather than just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no, he gave him a standard cadence count, and counted slowly, and Morris got back up, and they continued to fight. They went up on the stage. Morris tried a moonsault off the steps. It missed. It looked ugly, and he took a bad-looking fall onto the stage. Then Bubba went down to the ring, and he retrieved a motorcycle.
Yes.
And he started the engine.
This is all true, everybody.
He started the engine, and he pointed it at Hugh Morris.
This was also great, because as he's starting the motorcycle and aiming it at Hugh Morris, Bischoff is like, he can't do that!
Yes.
And I'm like, wait a second. You're supposed to be the heel announcer, the leader of the NWO, so... What?
Yes.
And he claims... What did he say? It's illegal?
He can't do that.
He'd be arrested, something
DiBiase
like that?
said it's against the law, and then one of them said, not here!
I think it was Bischoff that kept saying this was not allowed, and DiBiase was like, no, it's fine, we're here, it's the NWO pay-per-view. So, what happened was, Bubba zooms up the ramp on the motorcycle, and he fucking runs over Hugh Morris.
Yes.
Morris gets whacked and does a flip bump off a motorcycle, and is killed, apparently. To which point, Bischoff, who was concerned about an arrest warrant as a result of this, suddenly begins cheering like, yay!
Yeah.
Great job, Bubba!
Okay.
Woo!
So you'll recall earlier in this match, after a wrestling move, the ref had administered a fair count to Hugh Morris, and he recovered. So now they've run him over with a goddamn motor vehicle. Bubba climbs off the bike. He sprints down to the ring and dives in.
Now's his chance.
Now it's his chance. And the referee, now he counts twice as fast, and he counts Hugh Morris out.
Yeah.
He had to cheat after the match was clearly won. He didn't cheat when it would have made a difference.
This was 20 asses.
This...
I don't know what that means, but that's what this was.
But I can't argue. This was 20 asses. So, we have more Miss NWO shit. The third question, what would you do to be in Hollywood Hogan's movies? And the answer was, whatever it takes. And yes, that is in fact the exact same answer they gave to what would you do to tame big sexy Kevin Nash. The fourth question was something about Ted Turner's money. I didn't understand the question or the response. And then they cut to a go-go girl dancing behind the screen, so we just saw the silhouette. It was the least sexy silhouette of a dancing girl you ever saw.
May have been a man, for all I know.
It's entirely possible. And I thought that...
It may have been Fit Finley back when he had a mullet.
I thought this was, a giant shadow on the screen, so it looked like, everyone in the arena could see it. And then the camera panned out, and it was an actual size shadow. It may have been smaller than the actual human being casting it. And there's this big arena with a few thousand people and this little dot of a dancing girl down in the corner.
Yeah.
That made me laugh. They talked about this. Then they plugged the website. NWOWrestling.com.
Yeah.
This
I gotta
is
see
awesome.
if this still exists,
They
actually.
were talking about... Did you see on the board the official website for Space Jam is still active? It's awesome.
Oh, NWOWrestling.com does not exist.
That's a pity.
It's a generic page with, like, the smiling blonde girl.
That doesn't sound too bad.
I know you've seen this. Everyone has.
Probably have. So, yes, that was some comedy. We had Jeff Jarrett versus M. Wallstreet.
M.
I don't know why.
Husky Harris Sr.
Yeah, this is Husky Harris's dad versus Kurt Angle's ex-wife's husband.
You know, when they first mentioned that Husky was Mike Rotunda's son, I never saw it. But now that I saw Mike Rotunda wrestling in the mid-'90s, I totally see it.
It's also true, he obviously is much leaner than his son, but Mike Rotunda had his entire career, and he was, usually considered average in size, maybe even undersized sometimes. He was way bigger than Jeff Jarrett, and would be one of the 4 or 5 biggest guys in any national show right now.
Well, Jarrett's not all that big, but...
I realized that, but... So that was intriguing. So, they had a match. It was boring. The big deal was Deborah McMichael and Mongo were in the crowd, and every time Jeff was in trouble, Deborah would try to beg Mongo to help, but he wouldn't want to. Because God forbid he helps the WCW guy win. So then in the end...
Well, there was a whole triangle
Was there
deal.
a triangle thing going on?
I believe so, yeah.
I've completely forgotten that. She did go back to WWF with Jarrett, didn't she?
I believe so, yeah.
I think they were...
Well, I mean, they were definitely in...
Because they were together with Owen. So, yeah. So anyway, Wallstreet hooked an abdominal stretch. And finally, Mongo relented to his wife's wishes, and he climbed up in the apron, and he clobbered Wallstreet with a briefcase. He fell down. Jarrett made a cover, and first the ref refused to count, and then Mongo held out the briefcase as if to say, "Count or I will fucking kill you." And then the ref counted as fast as he could and ran away.
Yes.
That was the only redeeming point, I think, of this entire show right there.
Yeah.
So that was that. And they cut to a shot of Arn Anderson looking on. He had a mix of boredom and disgust.
Largely disgust.
And in fact, that's what DiBiase said. Arn Anderson looking on with a look of disgust.
He was disgusted with this fucking show.
There's another point later on where they cut to Harlem Heat and Sherry looking on in a coma.
Every wrestler because I don't think these wrestlers knew that they were on camera at the moment. Because they're all just sitting there like, this show fucking sucks.
What is this shit we're watching?
Yeah, it is horrible.
Terrible. So, 2 more questions for the Miss NWO girls. First question is, what is your best feature? And she said feet.
She said.
Her feet were her best feature. So, that pleased Rex Ryan and nobody else. Next woman literally couldn't even communicate.
No.
He tried to ask her a question. She didn't understand. He tried again. She still didn't understand. They then cut to the go-go dancer who appeared to be playing invisible drums.
Yeah.
And then the main event of the first half of the show, Scotty Riggs versus Buff Bagwell.
A real match.
That people had to pay for.
Yeah.
A real match on a paid program.
Quite frankly, the match was not horrible.
No.
It was just really fucking boring on this show.
It was, yes, it was nothing you need to see. Let's see, at the end of this, I noted it was around about a star and a quarter, which means it's far and away the best match on the show to this point.
Yeah, Riggs was a very good babyface worker, and Bagwell was a totally fine heel. I mean, as a match, this was perfectly acceptable. Unfortunately, it was a match amidst 20 asses.
Yes, the amidst 20 asses. It was an ass. Actually, I was going to say an ass-free match, but we saw Bagwell's ass here. Yeah, the heat segment went a little long, especially all the camel clutches, but the high spots they were doing at the beginning was like the first real athleticism on the entire show. So I'm not going to knock these guys for anything. They started talking about how here is where they did the high spot, and the fisheye cam was waving back and forth, and I got ill. And Eric started talking about how the day after this show was the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And then he said, "You won't be seeing camera angles like this in the Super Bowl." No shit.
Yeah.
No, you won't see angles like this in the Super Bowl. So they had the match. They were wrestling at completely random points. The NWO announcer would just go, "Loser," over the house mic for no reason. So then they did a spot. Okay, there was one great spot. Those of you who remember the American Males as a tag team, which was these two men before they broke up, they would try to get the fans behind them by clapping to their music, where they would hold their arms straight out to the sides and then clap their hands together as high up over their heads as they could. So Bagwell's got the heat, and he picks Scotty Riggs up, and he stands behind him and grabs him by the wrists and forces him to do the clap repeatedly. So this upset Scotty Riggs, and so he responded not by throwing an elbow or a kick or any of these. No, he thrust his ass backwards into Bagwell's pelvis and lays him out.
Here's my ass for your cock.
Take this. Take my ass, he said. So, yes.
I just lost it.
Who cares? Oh, they had a struggle on the top rope. Buff knocked him down and then hit the blockbuster for the pin. And it was, as we noted, not a good match.
Did I really just yell, here's my ass for your cock on this show?
I believe you did.
That just thousands of drops will be created from that fucking line right there.
So,
all because of this stupid ass NWO pay-per-view.
So Buff celebrated. He went on stage. They had another ghetto pyro display for him. He danced with the old women up there as Bischoff hinted that he used to be a stripper, and that was that.
This opened with DDP and Scott Norton in a wrestling match, and kind of one of those deals where it looked like it was on its way to being a decent match. You know? Scott Norton's a big, tough guy. Dallas Page, pretty good worker, and they did a whole bunch of stuff, and suddenly Sting appeared. Fake Sting, presumably. And
that's a good question. Probably because it must have been, because the real Sting never showed up on the show. But there was a man shown from quite a distance away wearing a trench coat and white face paint.
And Bischoff was excited, so I presume this was fake Sting.
Yeah.
So then, as Page is about to hit his finish, all of a sudden, Bagwell and Big Bubba Rogers and some of the other B-team geeks came down to the ring, and they attempted to recruit him into the NWO. So, in the middle of the match, mind you.
Yeah.
So he put the T-shirt on and shook Norton's hand, and then gave him the diamond cutter, and then ran through the crowd, and I guess that was the end. Norton won via count out.
That is what, yes, Nick Patrick said that. Nick Patrick turned to the camera and announced it, and they played the same damn NWO song.
They played that song so many times on this show.
And if you have not seen the show or forget, there were more than one NWO song. We all remember the porno music that they used basically for Hall & Nash. The B-Teamers had their own tune. It was jauntier.
What's jauntier?
It was happier. It sucked. And
or jovial.
It was a, I don't know.
It was like the roll out the barrel of the NWO.
Sure. So that's the song they played 800 times on the show. And yes, the angle they were doing here, because DDP had been a heel forever, and this was the angle that was turning him babyface, and he was still coming out. He's still smoking a cigar for his entrance, had sunglasses on, totally. He was Jersey Shore sleazy before there was a Jersey Shore, if you know what I mean. And
no, that was way too complex, Ace.
Well, there was still a place called New Jersey, and it had a shore.
I see.
There was just no MTV program.
Thank you, Vinny.
So, yeah.
We had the
interview guy for more Miss NWO bullshit.
Yeah. Katz. And they...
Katz?
Yeah, Jeff Katz.
Oh. Mm-hmm. I thought your cats had just run in their room.
No.
Yeah, the only highlight here was that he started doing the interviewing while they were still showing replays in the previous match. So we're watching Scott Norton and Dallas Page in slow-mo as he began asking questions like, what would you do to satisfy Masahiro Chono?
Anything it takes.
That was the answer. That was the popular answer these women had.
And that will be a hell of a drop. Steiner Brothers versus the Outsiders. This, at first, was not bad. It was a tag team match. Hall and Nash were much younger. Steiners were obviously much younger. In fact, coincidentally, everyone on this show was much younger in 1997.
In the building was much younger 14 years ago.
What an amazing stat that is right there.
Yes.
So anyway, they went too long. They went fucking forever.
And also, when they got the heat on Rick took like 7,000 moves in a row. Mm-hmm. He just sold, and he didn't sell well either. He just took a bunch of punches and a million elbows a side slam or two. The early part of this match, actually, when these... Well, I was going to say 4 giant men. Nash was on the apron. But these 3 giant men were throwing each other around. It was really good. Then it slowed down.
Yeah, and finally. Go ahead.
An hour later, Scott Steiner got the hot tag. He ran wild again. He was terrifying again. He suplexed Kevin Nash onto his head. Quite likely the only time that ever happened. And that was the finish. I
totally forgot, too, when we watched this an hour ago.
Yeah. The Steiners went for the Doomsday device. Nash broke it up by shoving Rick in the back, and I didn't even realize this happened at the time until they showed a replay later.
Didn't the Steiners just do the combo top rope bulldog?
What's that?
The Steiners?
They did.
I presume that's what they were setting up for here.
The point is, Rick Steiner had Scott Hall on his shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And Nash hit Rick in the back. And as I said, I didn't even notice this at the time, but like dominoes, they all fell into Nick Patrick, who stumbled over and waved his arms in the air.
When you say that Nash hit them from behind...
He hit them with his ass.
I guess.
He did his knee... it's the same knee lift he always did. It's usually a knee lift to the belly, so it looks better.
Dominoes is a perfect analogy because you give one domino a little tiny push and they all fall down. Yeah. That's exactly what happened
here. He
gave
a little tiny push here. He shoved his hip into Rick Steiner's back.
I guess.
And that caused... Would you like to say he stood behind Rick and raised his knee?
He ran at Rick and then at the last minute tried to dodge around him and not touch him.
I suppose.
But he got him.
This caused Rick to put Scott Hall down. This caused Scott Hall to bump into Nick Patrick. This caused Nick Patrick to wave his arms to and fro and fall through the ropes. And that apparently killed him for minutes.
Long time.
He was down for a long, long time. So Scott Hall hit Scott Steiner with the Razor's Edge. He made a cover, but there was no Nick Patrick. So he got to his feet, raising his hands like, hey, what's going on? And he was doing this in such a manner as to make it patently obvious. He's basically shouting to the crowd, I am sitting myself for Rick Steiner to hit me with a bulldog. So Rick Steiner did. And then one of the WCW refs ran out from the crowd and ran to the ring and counted the pin. Place went crazy. Steiner took the belts and left. DiBiase and Bischoff were screaming that he was not an NWO-sanctioned ref. This should not count. It would all be thrown out later. And I don't remember what happened 14 years ago, but it just seems classic WCW to have a title match on pay-per-view end, and you as a viewer at home are left wondering, I wonder if that verdict will stand.
Yeah.
That's classic. It was, to this point, probably the best match in the show, if just because the crowd did go crazy for the finish. Like I said, the beginning and end were pretty good. It was just that middle portion that needed some work.
I'm trying to remember all the details, but Randy Anderson actually had cancer. He's since passed away.
That sucks.
And I think that they... I'm trying to remember if they actually fired him when he had cancer. I can't remember all the details, but I remember that... someone will email me tomorrow and remind me, but I remember it being quite the deal back then. But it was Randy Anderson here that ran back, and Bischoff was obviously very upset with him for doing what he did.
So we had Eddie Guerrero versus Syxx in a ladder match. Syxx's U.S. title was at stake. I said last week this is on the Eddie Guerrero DVD. Someone corrected me. It's on the Rise and Fall of WCW. So that's where I had seen it before. They had the NWO announcer identify Eddie as a Mexican jumping bean. Mm-hmm. And Eddie stopped and looked around like he was not cool with that. Bischoff called Syxx the one-man rock concert, which was not quite Heath Slater's catchphrase, but close enough to annoy me. They had a pretty good match that was a little hard to watch for a couple of reasons. First of all, you watch this Eddie Guerrero, and then you remember the Eddie Guerrero you saw in the end there in WWE, and quite frankly, it is no mystery why the man died. He put himself through some abuse.
Yeah.
And this Eddie here was a lean, athletic man with a very human physique, normal-shaped head, did have a very sweet mullet and mustache, and he could move like nothing. Or move like the wind. He looked great in the ring. And then Bischoff started talking about Syxx and his lengthy history of concussions. That was awkward. And then Syxx
So it was. You know what was interesting about this was, with all the concussion stuff nowadays, it seems like some people think that this is all like new information. when, obviously there is some new information, but, Bischoff here is talking in 1997 about how concussions are bad because once you suffer one, you're more susceptible to others. 1997, everybody! And he knew this fact in the 80s when he suffered them doing karate.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Six started throwing martial arts kicks. Bischoff went on another goddamn rant about karate and how there were...
As a man who does karate, this still infuriated me.
He started talking about Van Damme and Seagal and phony karate guys in Hollywood who have 50 camera takes and whatever.
I told the story about how I saw Seagal in the airport, didn't I?
Maybe?
Yeah.
How was Seagal in the airport?
I just saw him from a distance.
Was he attacked by a group of men who fought him one at a time?
No, believe it or not, he was only recognized by 2 people aside from myself.
Actually, I don't believe that.
Yeah, he showed up. He had a lackey with him.
Sure.
I know you're shocked. A bespectacled, out-of-shape fella was his lackey.
Oh, when you said lackey, I assumed it would actually be like a bodyguard.
No.
He had a lackey. Okay.
He had a legit lackey.
Okay.
So they were at the airport, him and his lackey, and his lackey was in charge of scheduling, I guess, or something of that nature. Anyway, the people that worked at the Starbucks kiosk apparently recognized him, and no one else did. And I was actually the first person to recognize him because I was standing there in the airport, and I looked over and I was like, is that Steven fucking Seagal? And I can't even remember the last memory I have of Steven Seagal was when I was a young teenager and I saw whatever movie it was where the chick with the giant boobs came out of the cake or whatever.
Oh, yes.
It's the only memory
Under Siege.
I have of any Steven Seagal movie, but I still recognize this fucker from a distance. And obviously he's much older now than he was in that film.
Much like the people from Sold Out.
Exactly. And so I went on my phone and I Googled him and I saw some of the pictures of him nowadays and I was like, sure as shit, that's fucking Steven fucking Seagal right there. So then people from the kiosk walked over to him and they struck up a conversation and it was clear that this was Mr. Seagal. And I was not going to go over and say, hey, Steve, can I have an autograph or any such bullshit? I just kind of... I observed from afar and I surreptitiously took a stalker-style photo with the iPhone. And anyway, the whole point of this story is that I can confirm from listening to him that Steven Seagal realizes how fat he is and has no problem making fun of himself.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's like the first likable thing about Steven Seagal I've ever heard.
Yeah, he was...
Most stories about him are not good.
I wish I remember the line he said about his ponderous midsection, but I forget it.
So anyway, Six versus Eddie Guerrero. They had a pretty good match. A lot of the ladder stuff they did has, quite frankly, seen a passe in 2011. It was nothing new. I'm sure at the time it was all pretty damn revolutionary. And they also did a good job of making it seem like a fight to grab a belt and not just a string of men doing stupid stuff. So the crowd, there was not a lot of heat early. You could hear one guy call Eddie a faggot, and then like 2 seconds went by, and then he called Six a faggot. Man, it was very hard to please. So they ended up... that's right, the finish for this sucked. They ended up fighting on top of the ladder. They both grabbed the belt. It came down. They both had a hold of it. So Eddie clunks Six with it.
The finishes on this fucking show.
Six fell to the mat, but I'm pretty damn sure Eddie was supposed to hold on to the belt, so he'd be left standing atop the ladder with a belt in his hands. But Six takes this bump to the mat from the ladder, and then the belt falls on top of him too. And he has to make like a conscious effort to not grab it. And Eddie has to scurry down the ladder and grab the belt, and then they announce him as the winner, and everyone cheered. So
there were some horrible finishes on this show.
Yeah.
One after another.
This is the only thing, really the only match in the show that I would qualify as being good. And I did save this. This is most definitely not the worst pay-per-view I've ever seen. It is still a strong contender. Well, yeah, we'll talk about it at the end, but...
We'll talk about it now.
All right.
The finals of the Miss NWO contest. My God. There was one mildly attractive,
bullshit,
if you'd been drinking, girl who had fake boobs.
There was, yes. There were women you could drink yourselves into.
Outside of that, and there were girls that I'd drink myself into a coma. And
there were literally grandmothers out there. These 10 women that they have been interviewed throughout the show. We all knew they had no charisma or personality.
Hopefully none of them are listening right now.
We all know that, we all knew by now that Most of them were old. We knew that
one couldn't hear.
One had no hearing. We knew one had a mullet. So
A couple had mullets.
they all came out and they were introduced one at a time by name.
One of them had a receding hairline. I swear to God, she had to be a guy in drag. I mean, there's no other way. It's just impossible.
So they were all brought to the center of the stage area one at a time to dance to the music. You'll never guess this, but they were bad dancers. They all had graphics that listed their name and their measurements and hobbies and stuff, but
height but no weight.
I couldn't read the graphics. They were produced too poorly.
Which, by the way, why would you have if I have many questions about this contest, not the least of which are all of them we asked last week. Like, why the fuck did they do this?
Why would you do this?
What was the point? But if the point, it seems to me, I could be wrong because I just don't get this, but it seems to me the idea was to use disgusting women, right?
Yes.
So why wouldn't you list their weight?
I don't know.
Isn't that part of the joke?
I don't know.
They're disgusting and they're overweight?
I don't know.
I do not understand this. It was like, this girl's 5'2", and her measurements are 38, 42, 38. And then you go, and then there's something like their hobby.
It was occupation and hobby.
Occupation.
Because I cannot read most of the graphics. I remember a few. I do remember one or two occupations, such as grain inspector.
Grain inspector. I liked pickup truck detailer.
That was a hobby, by the way.
Oh,
a hobby was pickup truck detailer. That was not the funniest hobby, because one woman's hobby was, I'm not making this up, everybody, cooking bratwurst and French fries.
That's a winner.
Not even eating bratwurst and French fries, cooking them.
Vinny, that's a prize. Come on now.
Hey, if she cooked them and I eat them.
That's what I'm saying.
There you go.
That's your dream woman.
She and we'd click.
Her hobby is cooking bratwurst and French fries, Vinny. Something she finds joy in and does frequently.
So, it completes her as a person. Eric Bischoff came down to announce the winner. He had clearly been drinking for several hours. He said these women were chosen largely because they lived in the area, so he would not have to pay for hotel or airfare for them. He said they had a tie after all these questions.
Yeah.
So he's going to ask the women one question. It took him forever to get this out. Then here is what happened to decide the winner of the Miss NWO contest. He walked up to the two women that were selected. He leaned over and he whispered into their ear.
They were selected. By who? I don't know.
Don't know. Still don't know. So he whispered he went up to one woman first. He whispered into her ear for like 2 seconds. She whispered into his ear for like 8 seconds. Then he said, "Oh, man!"
Yeah.
Then he went over to the other girl. He whispered into her ear. She whispered back into his, and they announced a winner. This was on pay-per-view.
Yes.
You had to put down money, dozens of dollars, to watch this. And that's what you got. Eric Bischoff whispering into the ears of ugly women. So, one of the women apparently volunteered to blow him because she was named the winner. They made out on the stage.
They made out.
Eric Bischoff
made out with the winner.
With his grandmother. She was given a crown or a tiara and sash and flowers. And then she got a victory lap. She sauntered down the ramp. She moseyed around the ring. Let me repeat, everyone. Pay-per-view.
Yeah.
This is what you got. Then she walked back up the ramp, and then she sat down in a chair. Was this the worst segment ever on a pay-per-view?
See, I don't know, because it's just tough.
What was...
The times have changed. I've mentioned this before on this program. Freeloaders probably haven't heard this, but when I watched The Ultimate Warrior versus Hulk Hogan in 1997 or whatever it was, the rematch in WCW, I gave it -5 stars. One of the worst matches of all fucking time. We watched that match about a year ago, and after the Dup Cup and 8 million women's matches and
Survivor Jenna,
500,000 geeks being called up too early from developmental and having shitty matches on NXT, you watch Hulk Hogan and the Warrior from 1997 here in 2011, and it's a dud.
It is merely atrocious.
It has gained 5 stars since that time. Still 5 stars away from being any good, but...
It has gained 5 stars to reach 0 value.
Yes, but times have changed. And, you know, I just think of... I mean, on pay-per-view, it's way, way up there. But you got to remember the Dup Cup was on pay-per-view, number one.
I have literally forgotten everything about that.
And as far as like segments, I mean, there have been some segments on Impact, there have been some segments on NXT, there have been some segments on Raw. I mean, this at the time, I'm sure, was like all-time the worst of pro wrestling. Nowadays, it would merely be something really bad on a pay-per-view.
Could be right. You could be right. It was certainly no good at all.
Standards have dropped significantly, is what I'm saying.
Standards have changed. We then had the main event, Hollywood Hogan versus the Giant. The Hulk Hogan, for I don't know why, he came out with a few members of the Dallas Cowboys, including Nate Newton, a man who would later be arrested with 175 pounds of marijuana in his trunk.
Pounds, everyone!
175 pounds of marijuana.
He had more marijuana in his trunk than I weigh.
Yes.
Significantly more.
Yes, so I suspect he is popular in the locker room. So, Giant at this point, it's the Big Show, if any of you don't know. He had been wrestling for like a year, perhaps 2.
He was
He was pretty fucking horrible.
No, he was god-awful. Again, this just goes to show how good Big Show is nowadays, even at his age and weight.
Yes.
He is like Ric Flair compared to the Big Show of 1997. His selling, I'm trying to think of who you even compare him to. He was a little better than Great Khali, but only a little.
He was like Shad Gaspard when
Shad was way better than Big Show here. Oh my god.
The selling in particular, I'm trying to think of, he was comically overselling everything, which is, it's bad anyway, but when you're 7 feet tall...
Great Khali is the best example I can come up with now that everybody would know.
He was at least athletic. He's more coordinated than Khali here. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not good because besides just being generally shitty, it's like he had no idea how just ridiculously big he was. He was running the ropes. He took a clothesline and took this giant wacky flying bump. In the middle of the match at random, he went up top and missed a flying elbow. It's like, do you not realize you are Gulliver in the land of the Lilliputians here?
Of course not.
You're a fucking giant. You're the giant. That's what they call you. It's your name.
Andor the Gate.
Andor the Gate. So, they're having this match. Hogan used powder. He used his belt. This did have... There was a phenomenal part here. Hogan hit a body slam, and he hit the big leg drop, which was his finisher. And he hit the big leg drop, and he turned his back to the Giant, and he started to flex and pose and taunt the fans. Meanwhile, behind him, Giant calmly got to his feet, stood up, and raised his hands in the air for the chokeslam. Hogan proceeds to parade around the ring. He goes from one side, then the next, then the next. He's laughing at the fans, talking about how great he is, how terrible they are, how he's slaying the Giant. He goes to all 4 sides of the ring, including at one point walking directly across the middle of the ring where the 7-foot-tall, 450-pound man had been not too long ago, but was certainly not there now. He does this to all 4 sides of the ring. Giant is behind him all the way. He stops. Finally, he is now going to make the cover and win the match. He turns to the middle of the ring. He bends over. Only then does he realize the Giant is no longer there. Mm-hmm. He looks up the ref, holds up both hands as if to say, where did he go? And then he turns around and Giant is behind him and he screams. This was awesome. This was great pro wrestling is what this was.
This was great pro wrestling.
This was tremendous. Sadly, it did not end there. Giant hit a chokeslam. He made a cover. Nick Patrick had been refereeing this entire show as a heel ref and had counted every 3 count. Here, he counted 1, he counted 2, and then he just stopped. So, Giant made a cover. Nick Patrick refused to count again, so Giant chokeslammed him. A million B-teamers ran in to get chokeslammed. Bischoff ran down and gave Hogan a guitar. I don't know why they had an NWO guitar ready. I don't recall Honky Tonk Man being in the NWO. I guess it's possible.
Well, Hogan always played the air guitar.
So this is his gift for main eventing the NWO pay-per-view. Mm-hmm. Well, he took the gift and he destroyed it over Giant's back. He hit him with a wooden chair a lot. Hall and Nash ran down.
The old cocaine-filled guitar as white powder flew high in the air.
Yes. So they pulled Giant singlets down, including briefly and gratuitously exposing his ass. Thankfully, they covered it back up quickly. They spray-painted NWO for life on his back. Hogan looked right into the camera and said, WCW sucks. Then the show ended. That was the finish.
Yep, that was your main event, everybody. No finish.
And here's the thing. That was the planned finish.
Of course.
It's not like something went wrong or there were technical difficulties or somebody got hurt. No, that's what they wanted to happen. Mm-hmm. Oh, my God.
This was a terrible pay-per-view, everybody.
Oh, my God, this is awful.
A terrible, terrible show. I recommend everybody watch it immediately. No. I would be lying.